Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, is the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and beyond. Please welcome Dr. Andrea Letamendi. It's been a while. Please welcome Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, Drea. Welcome to another episode.
Thank you.
It's good to have you.
It's good to be here. Today is a sad day for us, of course, because of the news that Adam West has passed away at the age of 88.
It's really sort of what prodded us to come to the studio and record an episode, because we felt like we'd been away from Batman for too long, and this was just a really horrible reminder.
Now, I know on the show we haven't actually spent too much time talking about Adam West. My introductory to Batman was from the animated series, and so in a way, Conroy was my original Batman, but for many people, Adam West was their first Batman. Mm-hmm. How did you get to know Adam West as Batman?
Coming home from school every day and watching the show. Same bat time, same bat channel. So, it was a big deal for me as a kid. And there was a period of time there where I didn't even necessarily know that it was camp. I just knew that it was fun. And, as I've gotten older, I've been able to see the camp, but I've also been able to see the incredible character that Adam West provided for both Bruce Wayne and Batman. So today's a sad day.
I agree. I have to say that I haven't actually seen all of the Batman 66 episodes, and it's the campiness that I felt detached from. I didn't quite understand it, but I know that for many people, Adam West has been the only Batman version that's been able to combine the superhero aspect, the lighthearted action adventure aspect, the humor, and I can't imagine anyone else will be anywhere near how he portrayed Batman. So certainly our hearts go out to folks who knew him well, who feel the loss right now, and we're open to hearing some of your feedback, some of the ways that you've felt very close to this particular Batman. And let us know. Send us a note, send us an email, Twitter message, and let's have a discussion about it.
And another little bit of sad news, albeit not as sad as the loss of Adam West, but we are losing our IMSI community. IMSI, as many people would know, if you've joined the community over there, or have been listening to the podcast over the last year or so, IMSI was a website that made every effort it could to be sort of the anti-bullying, anti-trolling, anti-Reddit, really. I mean, it was founded by a bunch of folks who came over from high positions over at Reddit, and they just wanted to form a community that was cool and loving and supportive, and everything that I saw over there was exactly that. But sadly, the experiment is over, and I guess there wasn't nearly as much money in being cool to each other than there is in trolling one another. So it wasn't necessarily as successful.
At least not in that particular approach.
Yeah.
So I know for our show, we've met a lot of cool people through that community. We've certainly had a lot of great discussions. All of our content, of course, is on our website, is on iTunes, is on our Facebook page. So we'll be able to continue those discussions and continue expanding our community and being available for everybody. So it is sad to lose that particular community and not have this safe space to go to, but to the best of our ability, we will continue to create that open-minded, educational, just safe space for people to talk about the stuff that we talk about.
Yeah, and I want to applaud Dan McComas and his team over there. For any of you, if you have the T-shirt that was made, the Arkham Sessions T-shirt, that was Dan and his team. That wasn't us. That's right. That was them asking us if they could make a T-shirt to give away to listeners. You know, that wasn't something that we brought to them. It wasn't something we suggested, and it wasn't something we paid for, and it's certainly not something that we charged for. No one got money back for those free t-shirts, and that was Dan and his vision and his gang over at MZ, just wanting to provide something to listeners and to just fans of Batman and podcasts and just being cool to each other. So we'll certainly miss everybody over at MZ, but we're wishing Dan and his team every bit of luck and future success. We do have a little bit of good news. We did record an episode as promised at our last convention. That was Comic-Con Revolution in Ontario, California, run by Mike Sigliano. It's the first year of the show. It was a one-day show, and we had a pretty great panel, I think.
I had a blast. I thought it was great. The questions we had, the discussions we had following the panel, a huge, huge shout out and thanks to our good friend and colleague, Livio Ramondelli, who of course was my co-panelist and was able to weigh in on his perspectives and interpretations of that episode. I don't think we've announced which episode that is. So we did. We did. Okay.
Yeah. We let everyone know that we were going to do Over the Edge, and we did.
That's true.
You'll be able to hear that episode in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. Some more big news, though we can't really get into it all that much. We have finally submitted our final official blurb for the Comic-Con book this year, and we will have a panel. We can't tell you when or where.
Can I just say, I hope I'm not giving too much away. Can I just say, we are going to be honoring the 25th anniversary of Batman the Animated Series with
some very special guests. Some
and
very special guests. You will want to be at this panel if you're a listener of the show, and especially if you're a fan of Batman the Animated Series. So
that's all. That's all we're allowed to say.
You're not allowed to go any further. Drea, let's talk about our new episode, Growing Pains. This one was written by Robert Goodman. Of course, it's a deep, sort of introspective episode, so the story naturally has to have been Paul Dini's, at the very least, partly Paul Dini's. And it was. The story was by Robert Goodman and Paul Dini, written by Robert Goodman. Let's talk about it. This episode, the thing that we've talked a little bit about with the new Batman Adventures is that these stories aren't nearly as much about Batman as they are some of the surrounding cast members. And this episode is very Robin-centric. We start out with a young girl who's out walking. She appears to be lost. She is scared. And suddenly, Robin comes in to help her when, some thugs are surrounding her. Robin saves her and finds out that she doesn't remember anything. She doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know where she came from. She doesn't know where she's going. And she's really quite frightened. She takes off. She bolts, and he chases after her.
The one thing that she seems to know is that she's looking for somebody or something, and that she's on the run. Yeah. But in the very first few scenes, there's certainly an identity confusion. She can't answer questions about who she is, where she's from, what her name is. All she knows is that she's looking for somebody.
Now, this is something that we've sort of talked about before in, was it The Forgotten? The prison episode where Bruce Wayne, for a period of time, forgets that he's Batman, and thinks he's in a Cool Hand Luke type situation in a prison. So certainly we are not unfamiliar with the trauma of forgotten identity. She doesn't appear to have a head wound.
Right.
So we're not sure how she's gotten to this point. But we do know that Robin is quite taken by her. He's very concerned about her. And he actually goes to great lengths to get other people to be just as concerned. Batman, unfortunately, isn't as concerned about her as he is a new, extremely dangerous villain here in Gotham City. Someone they've never seen before, but a brutish man, gigantic, and certainly someone on Batman's radar. Now, I think this is where we see the difference between Batman and Robin. Batman is really concerned with the hulk of a man who is terrorizing Gotham, and Robin is more empathetic. He is the guy who is more concerned with the young girl. Mm-hmm. You would think that if Batman were legitimately concerned about the little people in Gotham City, that he would be just as concerned about this little girl who has no memory of who she is or where she came from or who she's looking for. Especially if Batman suffered from this exact same experience before. You would think that he would be sympathetic to her plight, but he warns Dick that this other menace is more important. Drea, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think initially Robin goes into protective mode, mm-hmm. in the sense that when he discovers this little girl, he immediately wants to serve as somebody who will assist her, keep her from harm, better understand. Like his detective work here is about empathy and being the rescuer. I think that with Batman, his detective aim is sometimes aligned with that, but a lot of times it's aligned with figuring out the perpetrator, figuring out who is motivated to deliver, violence and harm. And a part of that could be the way that they relate to those certain characters. In a way, I mean, we have a really young Robin. We have Tim here, who's relatively about the same age, maybe slightly older as this little girl, who he actually names her Annie. So we'll call her Annie. So he's been sympathetic toward her, and I think that he also relates to her. It's in many ways an identity crisis. Where is this person from? Where's their family? I think at some point he asks, where's her family? And she doesn't know. And I think that's a huge determinant in his connection with her. Who's his family? Who is he? Who is he related to? Who does he connect to? Who takes care of him? And so immediately that's what he cares about. And that's what he wants to know about her. Because if he can figure out for her who those adults or protectors are, then he can solve this particular mystery or problem. His mm-hmm. detective work will be done.
Yeah. And it's one of those cases where if Batman just listened to Robin, he would probably catch his big menacing thug faster, because one of the things that we learn when Robin ends up seeing her again is that she is being chased by someone. She doesn't know who that person is. She only knows that she doesn't want to be anywhere near him. And as we find, it is Batman's hulking menace of a villain. So that character is trying to track her down for a reason. She doesn't know why. She just knows that she doesn't want to be around him. And she is doing everything she can to get away. I don't know about you, but it's sort of written in such a way that we're meant to believe that this character might be her father. Let's take a listen to their exchange here.
Do you know how long I've been looking for you? You were supposed to come right back.
Who are you? What do you want?
I'm her father, punk.
So Robin tries to defend her, but is well over his head. Batman comes in and saves the day. They end up chasing the character down into the subway and lose him down there. But Batman is able to take a sample, like a dirt or a mud sample. Right then and there, we should know what we're dealing with.
This is letting us know who we might be dealing with.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Certainly Robin Robin isn't really inclined to get help from that clue. But at this point, Batman might know, and Batman decides to investigate further and study the sample. Robin, on the other hand, I think it's at this point where he's frustrated and annoyed, and he decides to take this case on his own. And he's in this kind of embitterment mood and says, I'm just going to do it myself. And then he goes and looks for homeless people.
Yeah. He goes and he looks for her, at shelters and whatever. He ends up finding her, and there's a great exchange that I want us to take a listen to. Dre, let's listen to it now.
You shouldn't be trying so hard to help me. He'll hurt you too.
I can handle him.
What makes you so sure?
I know his type. My dad wasn't much of a prize either.
So that's why you care. You're the only person I can remember who ever did.
So we go back to Tim Drake's origin story from earlier in the season. Criminal father, no longer in town.
Mm-hmm. He's abandoned. He spends a lot of time by himself, has to fend for himself. A lot of confusion about what parental love is. Mm-hmm. And certainly Batman takes him under his wing.
Yeah. But this is when Annie has a memory. She remembers something. She sees something that sort of strikes her, and she has a brief glimpse of something from her past. And they end up going to a lighthouse, and she remembers this area. And of course, there's a lot of water. You got a bunch of pipes that are leading to the ocean, presumably like sewer water or something, flowing into the ocean. And then that's when she sort of remembers having been here at one point, which is kind of odd, mysterious. Yes.
Well, I mean, certainly it's odd that she would have memories about being down in the sewers. Mm-hmm. Of course, multiple people come to mind, but it's very perplexing. And it's in my mind, it's like these recollections, these memories, these images are coming back to her. If there was a previous trauma involved, if there was a previous hardship or stressor, those feelings would come back as well. I was surprised that she continued to go through mm-hmm. the tunnels and the sewers and look for whoever it is that she's missing. But mm-hmm. I think it's that sense of needing to discover who she is and what that person means to her.
Right. Batman is in the Batcave analyzing the mud from the shoe of the big brute. And then comes probably your favorite line in the entire episode. Maybe even the entire series. I don't know. Your reaction was classic.
I know who Daddy is.
I know who Daddy is.
So Batman knows. He doesn't tell us. He doesn't tell us right away. But he knows. And he heads out to the Batmobile off to go save the day. He's actually put a tracker in Robin's utility belt. So he knows exactly where Robin is. And so as Robin and Annie continue to go through these pipes where she remembers having been at one point, that's when they come up across her father or the authority figure, whoever mm-hmm. this character is. And we learn that it is, as we probably suspected, Clayface.
Clayface. The guy transforms into Clayface, mm-hmm. or what we know to be the shapeshifter, the non-shapeshifted Clayface version. So the pile of mud with a face. The last 5 minutes are so disturbing and really, really difficult to process.
Yeah.
It's just it's just crazy.
Well, let's go through it here for a second, because a little bit of the clay from Clayface gets onto her mm-hmm. and absorbs into her skin. And that's when she has a flashback. And the flashback is essentially explaining how he survived the last time we saw him in Batman the Animated Series. Because remember, he was in the water. He was completely diluted and dissipating. We just assumed that he was gone forever.
Right. He fell from a great height and we saw him dissolve into the water.
Right.
The idea is that he probably didn't survive.
Yeah. He had no way of his body coming back together because he was in the ocean. And presumably that would have been true had it not been Gotham City. And out of many of these pipes, some chemical ended up restoring him, bringing him back to life and bringing his body back together. And the thing is, he was weak. He didn't really know where he was. And so he sent out a scout, a piece of him made of clay, created a little girl, sent her out to figure out where they were, what was going on. She forgot because I guess she traveled too far and forgot who she was, forgot what her purpose was, forgot about Clayface, no longer wanted to be associated with this feeling in her. And that's when we ended up meeting Annie. So Annie is basically a sentient, a separate sentient identity from Clayface.
But calls herself Clayface. The part that for me, I mean, there are a couple parts that were disturbing. One is that when she has that memory and when, you know, after the mud dissolves into her skin, she identifies as Clayface. I think she even says, I know now. I remember now. I'm Clayface.
Yeah.
And
because she's not technically a separate identity.
Right. She is made from his mud and initially his purpose. Like she had his purpose. She had the directive to go out and see if it was safe. And over time, I would say a combination of things happened. She lost those memories and lost her purpose. But then what does one do? One starts to develop a new purpose. One starts to explore who they are. What do they look like? What do they mean to other people? How do they relate to other people? And meeting Robin, in a way, triggered some of that identity development.
Yeah.
By him asking, where's your family? Who are you looking for? Where do you belong? Questions that she may not have thought about. So when she realizes that she's Clayface, it's both disturbing and somewhat sad because you realize that she isn't a person by the definition of Clayface being the person, and she is a piece of him.
Are we getting into the Measure of a Man, Star Trek: The Next Generation?
We totally will. I think that was the first component of this, of the end of this, that just kind of made me sit up a bit. Her identifying as Clayface and not thinking that she's a separate identity, and then Robin asserting, "I'm going to save you. You're not Clayface. You are your own person," and he tries to save her, and she in turn convinces him, or tries to convince him, that she's not real.
So I have to ask a question, because this sort of bothered me a little bit as I watched the episode. Where does this episode take place in terms of time period? It certainly takes place after he fell off the cliff and, you know, dissipated into the water, clearly. But if you remember, one of the short stories in Holiday Nights was Clayface taking on Batgirl.
I saw the Holiday Nights one as kind of a one-off, though.
Maybe, but if it was, because that was our introduction to the new Batman Adventures. It was our introduction to Tim Drake.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's almost like this one takes place before that, because there's no, you know, he's still Clayface in that episode. He's not forgotten who he was. He's not looking for this little girl. So it's almost like the order should be swapped. I don't know. I don't know if that's important, but to me, when we're analyzing it episode by episode and we're looking at the arcs, that seems like a pretty big difference a little bit. But I don't know. I don't know that it's meant to bother us.
Well, yeah, I think the holiday one is kind of a one-off because how I see this Clayface is that he's not a full completed person. He's not an identity, and we'll definitely get into whether he's a person or not. But thinking about him as a live single entity, he's still fragmented by virtue of having this little girl exist out in the streets that he's trying to bring home.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when you look at the perspective from Clayface, his line of thinking is, I'm not whole unless this little girl joins me and is enveloped into my mud body again. Then I will be not fragmented. I will be more of a full person. And what does that mean for him? Maybe he'll be able to have self-direction. He'll be able to, we see him as a villain, of course. So does this pose a danger for the city? What does that mean for him in terms of being a full integrated self? So that's one level of this that I've considered. I'm stuck on the girl because she is very assured that she's not supposed to be a separate person. She's Clayface. And so it's quite sad. At the end of the episode, even though Robin is trying to save her, she sacrifices herself.
Yeah, because Clayface is going to kill Robin. So she sacrifices. She runs at Clayface, tackles him.
Then she dissolves into his body. It's really bizarre. It's incredibly bizarre. But we understand that what she's doing is meeting multiple needs. She's saving Robin. She's giving Clayface what he wants. And in a way, I wondered, does this fulfill her destiny or her identity? Is this her sacrificing herself entirely? Is she no longer has a consciousness? She no longer has an identity. She's gone.
Yeah.
And so at the very end of the episode, they take Clayface away. He's captured, and he's rolled away on a Bacta tank. He's in,
you got to keep him, because we know that the
moist.
water. Yeah, we know that the water will sort of keep
that's
him.
right.
Yeah. So
yeah, they kind of roll him away in this tank, and then Robin says something really interesting.
I've got that clip. Let's take a listen.
We'll book him on the robberies and B&E, right? Anything else?
Yeah. Murder.
So in Robin's mind, the little girl was murdered by Clayface. And I can't argue against that. It seems like if you think of her as a separate person, then yes, he destroyed her.
Yeah. Now, again, I go to Holiday Nights. We know that Clayface can do this because remember his story started out with the little hoodlum kids, the multiple hoodlum kids that were in the mall. And then they all came together and formed. So he has the ability to become different.
Maybe. So now I'm wondering if the holiday episode is supposed to be later than this, because maybe he's kind of perfected or mastered the ability to create little persons that he can send out who look like children and reintegrate with them.
And they will always be him. They're always, it's just in this case, it wandered too far. And I guess sort of the psychic link or radio signal just kind of got disrupted and she no longer knew who she was or what she was supposed to be doing. It's a really interesting episode. It's very sad. But on top of what Robin's take of it is, I was really interested in Batman's attempt to console Robin that took place right afterward. Let's take a listen to Batman here.
Sometimes there are no happy endings.
Yeah, I think this is one of the first times that Tim has to come to terms with his role, his job, that ultimately at the end of the day, they have to capture the bad guy. They have to be seen as the rescuers and protectors, of course. But at the very end, that may mean losses. And I think Batman has, at this point, experienced enough of that to be able to appropriately handle the sadness and to be able to deal with it. And I think for Tim, it's so complex because, of course, Tim sees this as this little girl dying and her heroic act to help him meant something to him. Mm-hmm. And then again, going back to the very nature of their connection, there's something incredibly sad about his understanding of what it means to have an identity. And a part of our identity is where we come from. Mm-hmm. Who is our father, our mother, our parent, our guardian, our caregiver? Where are the people that take care of us and protect us? What is our community? Where do we learn our values, our lessons? We know who we are because other people tell us and teach us who we are. And so I think that, of course, Batman has this black and white thinking about it in the sense that, we've done our duty and we need to move on. And I think for little Tim, there's a sense of trying to understand and integrate the idea of his own sense of identity as not being full or not being completely whole, because he doesn't have all the answers to those questions I just mentioned.
What I thought was a nice sort of parallel to Tim's own story is the idea that for every head side of the coin, you have a tail side of the coin. And Tim is that kid who had a father who was a criminal. And Tim, by the graces of someone who helped him, was able to get out of that. And I think Tim sees Annie as the opposite. I think Tim was trying to be Batman, helping Annie escape her fate of following into her father's footsteps, even though her father was Clayface. And he sees it as a failure that he couldn't rescue her from that life that clearly she didn't want to be a part of.
That's a great point, because in a way, as Clayface breaks out of Arkham and continues his own mission, which will likely be one of criminal activity and violence and harm, she's going to be a part of that. Mm-hmm. So, I completely agree with you. What it does raise for me at the very end of this story is the question of who is Annie and whether she is a person. And I wanted to ask that from you. Do you think that Annie was a person? And if so, or if not, how would you define a person?
So now we are getting into the Star Trek data.
Well, you could pull from the Star Trek episode, Measure of a Man.
Right.
If that's how you define a person.
What it means to be alive.
Mm-hmm. Well, we would say she's alive.
She's alive. Is she fully sentient? Because she doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know where she comes from or what her mission is. So there is something that's missing from her. That ability to process is missing. Now, she can certainly become something new the more she fills in what is missing with like new experiences and things like that.
So she's a bit of a blank slate,
right?
But could potentially develop those things. So we mentioned the episode Measure of a Man from Star Trek: The Next Generation. The three criteria that need to be a part of, in this case, Annie, would be intelligence, self-awareness, and consciousness.
Okay. She's intelligent. She's self-aware.
Wait. So she's intelligent because she's, because why?
Well, I don't think intelligence is like IQ. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not so much that she's, a genius. It's that she has intelligence. She has the ability to function and to
problem solve. Yeah. I agree with that.
So she's intelligent. She is certainly self-aware. She knows that she exists. So that would be self-awareness. So she is aware of her existence. And then what's the third one?
The third one is consciousness.
Similar to in that episode, it's almost impossible to define what consciousness means in this respect. So you could not say that she's not conscious, and therefore you would have to say she is a person. But does that mean I mean, you're basically arguing for Clayface at this point. Like
Well, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. As we apply these criteria to Annie, we apply them to Clayface as well.
Right. Like if my finger were like for instance, I think what you could say is, say, a worm, or, you know, a creature who, if you cut them in half, will become two separate entities. Are they both two separate entities now? Do they have two separate consciousnesses? Consciousness. Do they have two separate identities? Will one start to do things differently than the other one, even though it once belonged to that one? I don't know how that works.
I think you're right. I think it's very much related to Clayface when we consider Annie. Yes, she's intelligent. She's able to cope with new situations. She's able to problem solve. She's self-aware. She's able to understand herself as separate from others. But her subjective experience is interesting in the sense that I'd probably say she is aware of her own self and her existence and her actions. And so she must have a subjective experience that's independent from others. Even Clayface, when she's separated from him. So, based on those definitions, I would say that she's a person. I did look it up to see what definitions are in existence for person, for what makes a person. And a lot of that has to do with self-determination. So we're talking about an ability to be able to be self-directed, to make decisions, problem solve, and enact those decisions and beliefs. I also think about a separate thing, which is personhood. So if Annie is a person, I think we're in agreement that Annie is a person.
Yes.
But does she have personhood? And personhood is, in my mind, a biological concept, or a neurobiological concept, in the sense that, well, because she has a working body, potentially brain, then she has personhood. Personhood is a moral concept. So the idea that Annie is owed recognition in virtue of her individuality, that she has an identity that is probably at some level rational, and therefore we treat her as a rational being, and that involves basic respect and appropriate relationships. And I think in the same way that Robin was treating her. So there's a lot of literature on this, not so much in psychology, but in philosophy, in terms of individualism, identity, and personhood. And I just had a couple quotes that I found that I wanted to read.
Okay.
One is about identity, and it's by Amin Malouf, and it is about the definition of identity. What he contemplated and poetically described it as is a pattern drawn on a tightly stretched parchment. Touch just one part of it, just one allegiance, and the whole person will react. The whole drum will sound. So it made me think about ourselves as the integrity of our whole person, right? That we don't define ourselves as pieces and parts, that you are defined as a whole, and the relationship of all your different pieces and parts are bigger than any single piece or part. And that is a very complex thing, but helps me to just consider the fact that oftentimes we do minimize people to one particular facet or characteristic. We're a bit blind to this really complex idea that a person is made of a multitude of aspects and characteristics. And it's that wholeness that makes a person have an identity or personhood. And I have one more quote from a textbook, The Identities of Persons. And it's basically a collection of essays by various philosophers. And this particular textbook is focused on what makes an identity, or how do we define personhood. And I found this really great quote by the editor, who says, "Being an individual requires having a room of one's own, not because it is one's possession, but because only there in solitude, away from the pressures of others, can one develop the features and styles that differentiate one's own being from others. Integrity comes to be associated with difference. This idea, always implicit in individuality, of preserving one's right against the encroachment of others within one's own society emerges as dominant. Conscientious consciousness is then the transparent eye that illuminates the substance of social life. So in non-Vulcan English, what that is basically saying is a person by themselves, yes, may have agency and individuality alone in a room, but it does take the relationship to others. It does take the social context. It takes Robin's relationship to Annie for her to understand herself as a person and having a separate identity. And I think that's kind of what makes, for me, this particular story a bit sad, because we understand that for Clayface himself to be complete, he needs to have Annie be integrated back into his physical body, representing this idea that we are defined by and understand ourselves by the multitude, facets, and aspects of our character.
So I want to go back to this idea of the worm that I brought up. Well, the reason I bring that up is because something that we've been talking about actually does make me remember some old experiments that I read about, and I thought you'd be interested. I think we're going back to what we used to do back in the day when I would actually come up with real life examples. So there was really a man made of clay, and no, there wasn't. But there was an interesting doctor back in the 50s, back in the good old days.
The heyday of psychology.
And of other science as well. But he was a scientist by the name of Dr. James McConnell. And he ended up doing some pretty controversial scientific experiments using flatworms. And one of the things they wanted to learn was whether memory existed outside of the brain. So worms, the flatworm has the ability to, once cut, if you cut off the head, it can regenerate. Okay. So the question was, if you cut off the head, which houses the brain, and the question becomes, will the tail remember the trauma? Mm-hmm. And through several experiments, they actually learned that the remaining part of the worm actually did remember what had happened to it. Mm-hmm. And it would respond to stimuli that was similar. Mm-hmm. And so that became interesting, because it was like, oh, you don't need the brain for your body to know what had happened to it and that it was bad. Mm-hmm. And then technically you've got two different worms now there. One is regenerated, and they both react similarly. Other experiments with worms have suggested that if you say shock one of them with an electrode, and then or if you, what they did was they turned on a light in the room, and it was followed by an electric shock. And the worm, as you would expect, recoiled. Then they tried it again, where they turned on the light but didn't shock it. And again, the worm recoiled, like it remembered. Mm-hmm. And then they cut it down the center. And both worms reacted the same way. They both remembered the experience, because they had once been the same worm that had experienced it. And so what's also interesting, and what we could kind of apply to this episode, one of the more controversial experiments that he tried with flatworms was this sort of cannibal experiment. He had trained certain worms to react certain ways and do certain things. He then took pieces of those worms and fed them to the other worms.
Why?
Other worms that had not been trained. And his experiment found that the untrained worms began to react the way that the trained worms had. So it's almost like they were able to take the consciousness in some way, and the memory
Yeah.
from that previous creature, and it now sort of, for lack of a better term, had a new home. So some scientists have since said that, that was absolutely impossible. They've tried to recreate the experiments. Some scientists have actually gotten identical results. Others have not. And, unfortunately, McConnell has sort of slipped away, like many scientists of his era.
Was he divided into two?
That happened. But, one has to question what new memories does Clayface have? What new memories does he possess because there was a little girl running around Gotham City?
Well, he now remembers kissing Robin because she did that.
What was that like?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. Yeah. I think that's certainly one of my questions about Annie in the hypothetical sense that she could have had a normal life if she escaped from Clayface. Mm-hmm. Maybe she would have regained some of her memories based on some of the research regarding really simple life forms. She may still carry some of the trauma that he experienced and could potentially develop her own set of memories and experiences and a sense of self. And I think I'm in agreement with Robin that she's owed that, even though she's just this piece of mud, right? Like initially she's just this piece of mud, but I still agree with Robin that maybe she was owed that, and we'll never know.
Yeah, she's gone. Sad. Good episode.
It's a great episode. I think that, like you said, it has a lot to do with Robin's own sense of self, his self-discovery, his development of his moral compass, and how he's differentiated from Batman.
Yeah.
Your story about cannibalism reminded me of some studies that looked at the intergenerational nature of trauma, and there are some really fascinating findings that come from mice studies where scientists would place the scent of what would be a predator, so like a cat, in the cage of some mice, or teach them to be scared of something through odor. And I think in some cases they would actually introduce the fear stimulus, like actually put the predator in the cage or have them be near cats. And then what they would do is they would have the mice reproduce. So they would have pups, like mice pups. And then those babies, as they got older, would be triggered by not the actual stimulus, not the actual cat or predator, but just the scent of the predator. So like a whisker or hair introduced into the cage. And it was posited that there was almost like a passing down of the trauma, that because because the first generation was introduced to the trauma directly, then the next generation, and actually even further generations, so those pups then grew up and had pups and so on, just by simply being reminded of the trauma through a whisker or a hair or something that introduced the odor, they would have the same fear response.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So, Drea, let's tell the good folks all about things we've got coming up. Like we said, there are Comic-Con, of course, in July. We can't tell you when. We can't tell you where. We can just tell you to be there.
We can probably say Saturday of Comic-Con.
Well, you just did. So we're going to say Saturday of Comic-Con. Stay tuned for more details. Seriously, if you're coming to Comic-Con, we want to hear from you. We want to know, what you're looking forward to, what you're going to be doing, and we want you to come hang out with us at our panel. We're just telling you now, stay tuned. There's going to be some good stuff coming. Anything else coming up for you?
I just want to give a shout out and thanks to the APA. They had recently hosted a live event, actually, that you moderated, Brian. Thank you for doing that. And it was all about professional identities and psychology. So that will be available, I believe, on YouTube very soon. I will share the link on our website, on Twitter, and check it out. Cool.
And it was a great event. You had a lot of great things to say. Drea, where can folks find you online?
I'm on Twitter at Arkham Asylum Doc. I have a website, underthemaskonline.com. And for the Arkham Sessions, you can find us on at Arkham Sessions on Twitter.
You can also find me. I am on Twitter at bward028. And on the same day that Arkham Sessions opened their Instagram account, I opened my own. I am at b_ward028 on Instagram because apparently there was already a bward028 there trying to be me. And you can also find us over at Facebook. Come like us. We are at Arkham Sessions there. And go and show your love to our family over at Fanbase Press. They on Twitter are fanbase_press. You can also go to fanbasepress.com to check out our schedule. You can check out their comics. You can check out their other podcasts. We want to wish a very happy birthday to Barbara Dillon, who's one of the co-owners of Fanbase Press. Her birthday is today.
Happy birthday, Barbara.
Yeah, by the time this goes up, it will have been a few days ago, but we were thinking about you on the day that we recorded this episode. Happy birthday, Barbara. Until next week, I am Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
I know who Daddy is.